days. Okay, so let's get started. Next slide, please. Here are the points of discussion Wendy, Sherry, and I will be covering today. Chamber's goals and objectives, Chamber priorities for 2021. We'll provide a background on our state's legislative process. We'll cover the importance of getting involved and how you can get involved. And most importantly, submitting your testimony and being able to share your personal story. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the Chamber's goals and objectives? A goal we share as a collective group is to improve the business climate and to help build a stronger and healthier economy. The four chambers in the Chamber Hui have three common goals and objectives. One is to secure Hawaii Island's economic future through diversification so that our keiki can stay here, to improve the climate and cost of doing business on Hawaii Island, and ensure the resilience and sustainability of Hawaii Island for future generations. You can learn more about your chamber's other priorities and initiatives by visiting their website, or better yet, just get involved with one of your chamber committees. We work hard to be a trusted resource for our business community, legislators, media, and other organizations. By working together with other chambers and being able to pool our resources and knowledge, we want to make sure that the information we provide is accurate and current for our businesses. And if legislators or the media have questions, we want to be a reliable resource of information that we can provide to them. And the last goal, provide value to our members through empowerment and access. Our organizations continue to be active in providing educational sessions like this one, really to serve the needs of our members and community. Okay. Moving on, I'd like to introduce you to my sister on the west side, Wendy Laros, President and CEO of the Kona-Kohala Chamber, who will give you an overview of our state legislature.
Okay, all right, thank you, Miles. Thanks for that introduction and welcome everybody. So I'm just going to go over a few things about the Hawaii State Legislature. So we've got 51 members in the State House and 25 members in the State Senate for a total of 76 altogether. The sessions begin annually on the third Wednesday in January and last for 60 legislative days. That usually ends the first Thursday of May, except for COVID exceptions. The current Senate president is Senator Ronald Kochi. He is representing Senate District 8, Kauai and Ni'ihau. And the current House Speaker is Representative Scott Saiki, House District 26. It's representing Makola, Makoli, Ala Moana, Kako, Ako, and downtown Honolulu. And as far as our island's representatives and senators, we've got Laura, I'm not entirely sure how to say her name yet, I'm so sorry, but do you know, Miles? Is it Asio?
Akasio.
Ashio, okay, thank you. And we've got Joy San Benaventura. She's the chair of Human Resources Committee. We have Drew over here on the west side and South Kona, Drew Kanuha. He's the majority caucus leader. We have Lorraine Inouye. She is chair of Water and Land Committee. And as far as representatives, we've got Mark Nakashima. He's chair of Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs. We have Chris Todd. We have Representative Richard Onishi. He's chair of the Labor and Tourism Committee. Gregor Iligan, and he's vice chair of Transportation. And we have Janae Capella, and she's vice chair of Education. Nicole Lowen, and she's Chair of Energy and Environmental Protection, and David Tarnas, Chair of Water and Land. So those are our senators and representatives from Hawaii Island. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our guest speaker today, Sherry Menor-McNamara.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for Miles. Made it just in time. Sorry, I had to jump on late. Had a last minute phone call that I had to take at the Capitol. But good to be here on Zoom. Much prefer to be at home doing this presentation in person, but so be it. First I wanted to thank you for tuning into this Zoom presentation, because that's the first step of becoming engaged in the legislative process, which is so critical, especially this session when legislators are contemplating bills that will either impact business in a good way or bad way, and especially as they focus on economic recovery efforts. So the screen that you see here, the slide, yes, it looks like a maze, and that's essentially a snapshot of what the legislative session is all about. I am not going to go into detail of each square, but the 10 points to remember from looking at this, some of you may remember the Schoolhouse Rock on Saturday mornings. I'm just a bill, and that's essentially how the bills go through over here with just slight differences. So the 10 points to get out of this presentation are: bills are assigned to committees. Bills can be either held, deferred, or passed. If it's held, it's generally dead. But if it's deferred for indefinitely, there's, for some miraculous reason and some changes in rules, it can be revived or passed. Then bills have to be heard by certain deadlines, or if not, they will die. Bills that are still alive will cross over to the other chamber. So for example, if it was a House bill, it will go over to the Senate side. So bills that are still alive will cross over to the other chamber as long as they receive the floor votes from the originating chamber, which is generally the case. Bills then go through a similar process. So whatever committees was assigned on the originating side will likely get assigned to similar committees on the other side. And after the bills go through the second process, if alive, they are returned to the originating chamber. Now, if the committee agrees to the amendments, they go straight to the governor for signature or no signature, which means it still becomes a law, or veto. But if the committees disagree, the bills go to conference for negotiation, and no testimonies are allowed during this time. If conference committees agree to a compromise version, then the bill goes to both the House and Senate for a floor vote. If the bill passes, then it goes to the governor. Both sides need to pass the bill to keep it alive. So that's a critical point. If the conference committee disagrees on the bill dies. So with that 10 points, which can be kind of confusing, that's essentially the legislative process and how the bill goes through the process for the next 3 months. Okay, next slide. So, why is it important to get involved? I've been doing this for 15 years, and I will say most recently, there's a lot of advocates that are gaining momentum. They are building their base. And not necessarily from here too. Some come from the continent, come here to advocate for certain causes, but what we haven't seen much is the business voice. And understandably, many businesses can't, especially from the neighbor islands, can't come down to testify at the hearing. 1, cost. 2, you just have to focus on your own business. And the other reasons we hear is that they don't want to get their business name out there testifying on bills that maybe could be controversial. And so there hasn't been a majority of the business voice being heard other than through respective organizations, such as the chamber. But the reason why it's important, and as you'll see here, that Senator Rosalind Baker from Maui indicated in an interview quite a while back, is a lot of us don't have familiarity in every area we might have to vote on or have to work on. So you need that perspective from the people that will be impacted by the legislation. And that is so true. When you think about the couple of thousand bills that go through the legislative session and 76 legislators are not going to know the details of the bills or the importance of the bills of each one and how it will impact the different stakeholders, especially their constituents. And not every 76 legislators sit on every committee. And so usually they will just vote the way their colleagues vote. So that's why it's critical to get involved and get your voice out there so that the legislators can make an informed decision. Next slide. So how to get involved? Well, there's different ways you can get involved. One is to get to know your legislators. And Hawaii Island is such a close-knit community, and many of your legislators who I've had the opportunity and the honor of getting to know well, they are really in tune and really want to hear from their constituents. So if you do know your legislators, call them and let them know where you stand on a position, and have an open discussion. But if you don't, schedule an introductory meeting, and most of them will want to take that call, especially if you're a constituent. And we put on here bullet points, be courteous to the staff, which all of us will do. Build relationships with them, because as many of you may know, it's the front line, it's the receptionist, it's the office manager that really are the gatekeepers. And they are the ones that schedule the meetings, and they're the ones that communicate directly to the legislators and provide background and feedback about calls, the tone of the calls, etc. Be specific on your ask and solutions to legislative proposals. So in addition to providing your position, tell your story, tell your perspective, and really drill it down to how an increase in GET might impact your business. How does it translate to number of jobs, et cetera. And also always tell the truth. That's common sense, but we do hear stories where, the truth is always not told, and that can have long-term impacts. Emails are not necessarily the most effective, but if sent, keep it short. Mass emails, I hear good and bad about it. There's some legislators that want to just have numbers. So while it may be a template or same language from multiple or hundreds of people, it's numbers, so that makes an impact. But I hear from others that it's okay. I'm getting inundated with the same message. So the key is, again, to customize it so that you can tell your story from your business. And then in the subject line, to capture their attention, because they do get inundated with tons of emails, is to ensure that you put from a constituent, because they prioritize those emails first. And then another way to get involved is through your chamber committees. I know the Kona-Kohala Chamber, Hawaii Island Chamber, and the organizations on this call also have their own committees, whether it's government affairs, economic development, et cetera. Because that way you can get additional information, you can share your thoughts and your perspectives, so that as an organization, they can come up with an informed position. Next slide. How to stay involved. So sign up for hearing notice. You can go to the Capitol website, which is capitol.hawaii.gov. And this is one of the easiest Capitol websites that can navigate. It's pretty direct, where you can just put in the bill number, you can get testimonies, you can get committee reports, all the contact information for both the senators and the representatives. So it's definitely a very accessible website and easy to navigate. Respond to action alerts. So what is an action alert? For our chamber, we use a tool called Voter Voice. And why we like it, is one, when we send it to our members, all they have to do is fill out their contact information. And if you don't know your senator representative, but I'm sure Hawaii Island knows all who their legislators are. But if for some reason you don't know, when you fill out your address, it will automatically send your letter to your respective legislators. So that makes it so much easy. It takes less than 30 seconds to respond to those alerts and fill it out. Now, we do provide language in there or a pre-letter so that we can send it as is, or as I mentioned previously, telling your story is so much better. So it gives you that opportunity. So to our members, we send action alerts. We sent one last couple of weeks ago, and we can identify which legislators have received these emails. And I know for Hawaii Island and Kona-Kohala, they have their own system, but sometimes these alerts will be forwarded to their membership as well. So, you know, again, it's critical that your legislators hear your voice, and this is one easy way to take action. Contact your legislators, as I mentioned earlier. Testify in a committee hearing. This year, more than any other year, is so easy to get your voice heard and participate and testify in a committee hearing because everything's on Zoom. I testified a couple of times already, and it is one of the easiest things to do because everyone is Zoom experience. And the beauty of it is you can multitask and do other things while waiting for your turn. The next one is volunteering on a political campaign. Why do I mention that? Because and of course you want to volunteer in a political campaign for a candidate that you support, but one, you can establish and strengthen that relationship with your legislators or the candidate for this matter, as well as the candidates will remember the time and effort you put in to help them get elected. And then finally, review your chamber communication channels. I know, again, the chambers have different modes of communications, whether it's newsletters or just emails sent out. Pay attention to them because really it will provide critical and important information, but also help you understand what is the current pulse, especially during the legislative session. Next slide. So a couple of ways. KAKO is a Hawaii Director of Public Officials sponsored by PRP, Pacific Resource Partnership, and it does list all the legislators and the contact information. So it's a very comprehensive directory. But with that said, the Capitol website also provides that kind of information and then some. So I would encourage you to go to the Capitol website and just navigate it and check out what kind of information is available. Next slide. Okay, so what's different this session compared to previous? Obviously, it's the impacts of COVID takes front and center, and the state of Hawaii is facing an enormous budget deficit. During the session, we've already seen a number of bills that includes tax increases, whether it's based on income, real property, sugar tax increase, a sugar fee, liquor fees, vehicle rental fees, etc. So while we are here in the most devastating recession and the most precarious stage in our economy, we are still seeing a number of bills being introduced that will increase the cost of doing business. On the federal level, obviously there's been a lot of effort and energy put forth in coming up with new proposals to provide more relief to individuals, families, businesses. What we're hoping though is that Congress will pass a bill, include funding for states to provide more CARES monies so that states and counties can receive those CARES monies and come up with programs to help small businesses. In the first round, I do know that I think most counties came up with some grant programs to help small businesses during this time. For our chamber, our priorities this session includes enacting an unemployment tax relief bill, which is currently moving forward. One of the key differences between this bills and other bills that are going through the legislative session is that they will need to pass a bill by March and sent up to the governor for signature by March 6th. So unlike other bills where they have until the end of April to pass or kill a bill, for this particular bill, it needs to be done by March 6th. And that's because Department of Labor will begin assessing employers or sending assessments to employers to pay for the UI tax. So we are heavily advocating, including Hawaii Island and Kona-Kohala chambers, as well as other organizations to pass this bill. Minimum wage increase. There's a number of proposals to increase the minimum wage, some to $17 an hour. And back in 2020, the beginning of the legislative session, our chamber did support an increase up to $13. But for this session, we are strongly against it because we believe now is not the time. And it will take several years for our economy to get back on track, and that we shouldn't impose any more challenges and difficulties for our businesses to keep their doors open and get on the path towards economic recovery. And thirdly is enact the PPP loan forgiveness deduction and tax conformity bill. Right now, the federal law does allow PPP deductions, but in order for that to apply to state taxes, it needs to conform to the federal law and a bill needs to be passed. So these are top 3 bills that we are on our list. But with that said, going through the 2,000 plus bills, there's 100 more that we are actively either testifying or monitoring on that range from tax bills, health bills, labor bills, land use bills, education bills, etc. Next slide. So in terms of operations, how COVID has changed the 2021 legislative session. As you may have heard, the state capitol will remain closed until further notice. We anticipate it to be closed until the end of session, where this legislative session, while session usually ends the first Thursday of May, the first Thursday in May, this year is going to end the end of April, because constitutionally they have to be in session a number of days. So what the legislature has done is adjusted their schedule by limiting some recess days and making some changes to the timetable so that they can ensure that they're compliant with the number of days that they're supposed to be in session. So it just moved up the last day of session to the end of April. The hearings and floor sessions are now live streamed on YouTube. So you can go to the YouTube channels, both on the Senate and House, and actually watch the hearings and floor sessions. Whereas before, it wasn't every session that was videotaped or broadcasted. The House and Senate committees will be accepting written and remote testimony via Zoom. The written testimony will be required to be submitted in order to also testify remotely. And this year, they're very strict. So you must submit your testimony at least 24 hours prior to the hearing in order to testify remotely. If not, then you'll likely not have the opportunity to do so. You can still submit testimony within the window, but it will just be added to the written testimony pile. Also, some committees, well, actually, I think all committees now impose a time limit. So I believe it's 2 minutes. And after that, from what I heard yesterday, you get automatically cut off if you go past the 2 minute time limit. And so when you do present your testimony, be concise, make sure you emphasize the most important bullet points. And then after that, if they have questions, they will go to Q&A after all testifiers have testified. And I believe there's windows to each committees. I believe it's 2 hours or 1.5 hours, depending on the committees, that they will have this remote hearing. And I think members will more than likely prefer to meet via Zoom than other remote applications when it comes to meetings. Next slide. So how to register and submit testimony? It's fairly simple. What you see on the slide, that's the way you do it. So you'll see when you go to the capitol.hawaii.gov website, if you want to get hearing notifications for certain committees or maybe all committees or even certain bills, you have the capability to do that. If you want to submit testimony, you just click on the testimony button and then it takes you to, next slide, to this page where you type in what bill number you want to testify on, and then it will ask you a series of questions. State your name, what position, and are you testifying as an individual citizen or on behalf of an organization? For us, it's the Chamber of Commerce Hawaii. And will you be testifying remotely or written testimony only? Now, after that, you see the green box. If you're going to do written testimony only, it will notify you that your testimony was accepted. If you're doing a verbal testimony, then about half an hour before it's time to testify, you will go to that hearing, what you see there, and click join, which is where the Zoom link will take you to. And that's half an hour before the actual hearing time. And then you'll be on this the square boxes of Zoom, and make sure you take your video off, mute yourself until you are asked to unmute and unvideo, or what I saw yesterday, they will call your organization and your name and you just unmute yourself. And then you testify and then mute yourself. And that's it. It's as simple as that. And as I've mentioned earlier, this legislative session is so much easier and also provides many businesses, and especially the neighbor islands who otherwise would not have been able to fly over to testify and get your voices heard. Next slide. So what does it all come down to? Really, especially again, this session, your voice contributes to change. And the stronger and the more unified the business voices and on a statewide level, the more impact we can have. And there are many pro-business legislators. There are many who understand the plight of businesses, and there are many that understand what it takes to run a business, even though they've never done it on their own. So what they need also, though, is to hear from the businesses so that when they do make a decision, when they do take a position, they have the backing of the business community to show why they took this position. Because if they don't have that and they take these positions, they are in a more vulnerable position to get questioned by advocates who are not necessarily aligned with ours. As you can see in the beginning, when Wendy went through the list of Hawaii Island legislators, they do hold key positions. They serve on important committees. So the Hawaii Island voice is important, and sometimes even more important on different issues, just because you have many legislators in key positions. And always assume that your testimony will tip the scales. We hear that, okay, my voice won't count, my testimony won't count. And I will tell you firsthand experience several years ago, when we sent out the action alert on a certain issue, it did change a few positions of legislators that voted yes, but in the end, because they heard from their constituents, they heard from businesses, they changed their vote. So the votes, their voices do count. And what it boils down to is trust, access, relationships. They aren't built overnight. They look to people they can trust. And once you gain that trust, you as a constituent, you as a business person will gain access to these legislators, because legislators will go to the people they trust and that they know to get information, data, perspectives on different bills. Going back to what Senator Baker mentioned in her quote, that we need to hear from different people to provide us information to make an informed decision. Next slide. And that is it. So we have on here contact information. I'm sure you know how to reach Wendy and Miles. And we have our teamer, Myung Oh, is our new Director of Business Advocacy, a very experienced lobbyist who has joined our team. So anytime we can be here to help you navigate the process, we are all here for you. But I just want to say thank you for your time, and the fact that you signed on to this webinar is a first step in getting engaged in a very important legislative session this year. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you very much. Let's see. Looks like we do have some replies in the chat. When you want to take those over?
You can go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, like Larkin says, yeah, it's good to set up your account early. That does take a little time, but oftentimes because of deadlines, and we found that out, that if you don't have it set up or if you're not ready to go online, it can affect, especially if you're down to the wire, like I was last week. Let's see. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Sherry?
You want to go ahead and have people put it in the chat box, right? Questions or
yeah, in the chat would be great.
Okay. And maybe while we're waiting, I have a question, and we talked about this yesterday, Sherry, and our Hui talked about it just on Wednesday. But could you repeat why we're in support of the UI bills and
Sure.
not against an increase? But because your explanation was excellent.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. So as you know, the UI fund is funded by employers, and they pay on a quarterly basis, and they pay into the fund. And they build a reserve based on their, they build reserves so that when they have to lay off employees, and employees files for unemployment funds, they build a reserve so that it can come out of that. Now, COVID was not caused by employers. COVID was caused, and the employers did not ask for the restrictions. Rather, the restrictions hurt the employers. So pretty much overnight, the UI fund was depleted. And as a result, the schedules is going to go from Schedule C to H. So every climb in letter is an increase in tax. And the federal government requires each state to have a certain balance in the fund. If not, that triggers the schedules. Now, because the fund was essentially depleted and the state had to borrow money, the schedule will face a significant jump. And on average, it's $600 per employee. If it jumps to Schedule H, it will go up to probably $2,600 per employee. Now, there's other various factors involved. So it's experience rating, number of employees, et cetera, that will result in what that amount looks like. So when we polled certain members from different industries and different size businesses, the jump was exponential. And to illustrate some of these jumps, one business was paying $7,000. If nothing is done to fix this or to provide tax relief, it will jump to $85,000. So $7,000 to $85,000. That's a significant jump that was not budgeted for. There was a nonprofit, a C3 organization, that would have had to pay $34,000 more. Another company that would have been $1.5 million more. So you get where I'm going, and all of these are local companies. And so what this legislature needs to do is fix the schedule statutorily. And so the bills are going through right now. And as I mentioned earlier, the bills need to pass the legislature and signed by the governor by March 6th, because the Department of Labor has to send assessments out to businesses with the amount they owe. So if they pass something out and it's signed by March 6th, Department of Labor can adjust the schedules accordingly. The proposal that is out there right now, we've been advocating for Schedule C to keep it what it was pre-COVID and keeping it at the 2019 experience rating, because obviously 2020 was a mess. So the bill that is going through now, and there's one in the House and one in the Senate. Yesterday, the House Labor and Finance Committees passed out a bill that lowers from Schedule H to Schedule D. So it's not C, but Schedule D for 2 years based on 2019 experience ratings. So that would be significant savings. And the reason why they did not keep it at C, which I believe the House Labor Chair, Rep. Onishi, advocated for, was that the Department of Labor said that if we keep it Schedule C, the way the fund was before and the health of the fund balance, 15% of businesses would not have to pay into the UI fund because they had good experience rating and they put into the fund a lot into the reserves. But 85% will still be stuck with the increase. So Department of Labor thought, in all fairness, that each business should pay into it. So they were advocating for DEF for 3 years. House Labor and Finance Committees kept it at DD for 2 years and at 2019 experience ratings. But they also said they can always revisit it next year based on what the economy looks like. On the Senate side, it passed the Senate Labor Committee and the chair just kept the admin bill, the DEF. It is now going to be heard by the Ways and Means Committee. So our thought is, based on the timing, the House bill will cross over to the Senate first, and hopefully no changes will be made, so that way the bill can be sent up to the governor for signature. But if changes are made on the Senate side to the House bill, as I mentioned earlier in that whole maze, it will have to go back to the House, and the House will need to approve the amendments to send it up to the governor. If they don't approve it, then it goes to conference. And with 3 weeks left in the legislative calendar until March, we're looking at a tight timeline. So the ideal situation is that the bill passes, the opposing side chamber accepts the amendments, and it gets sent to the governor. So that's why it's critical that a UI bill gets passed before March 6th, so that businesses are not faced on this humongous tax increase come April when they are required to make their first quarterly payment. So hopefully that answered the question and wasn't too complicated.
That was great. Thank you. I hope that helped a lot of our members as well, because it's almost counterintuitive. We don't want to advocate for any increase, but at the same time, there's these other factors, as you mentioned. So having more of a stair step type of increase is much better than getting hit from going straight to that highest level. So yeah.
Absolutely. And the good thing is that both the House and Senate recognize that something needs to be done. And they recognize that a huge increase would just decimate our local and small businesses.
Okay, great. All right. And so I do see in the chat box the UI bill numbers. So we can, I'll look it up and get that into the chat, or we'll get it out to you guys. All right. And then if more questions in our chat box, I'll go ahead and do one of these. So any updates on gut and replace processes? Are we expecting that this year? I know there's been a lot of conversation about that in the last few years.
Yeah, so gut replace, there's been, like you said, more attention to this I guess, procedure. And essentially gut and replace is that when the title is broad, let's say labor, and let's say it's a House bill and the committees put language in there and then they send it over to the Senate, and then the Senate says, okay, I don't like the bill, I want to introduce another bill of mine. But because the title is so broad, labor, they can essentially gut it and replace it with whatever type of language, as long as it falls under the huge umbrella of labor. And it doesn't even have to have a nexus to what the original side had in the bill. A lot of times it's done in conference committees. So most recently, there's been more attention brought to it because it just, after it goes to the legislative process, after committees hear testimonies from different stakeholders on the content of the bill, and then all of a sudden during conference committees, the whole thing is thrown out and put in with new language, and it doesn't get to go through a hearing process. That's why there's been a lot of questions about the validity and about the constitutionality and I guess the fairness of going through that process. My understanding is that it's still there, but I don't know, maybe because there has been more awareness of it, that there might not be, some legislators will not be inclined to use it. But there are times where they may have to, just because something emergency pops up that could impact, let's say, businesses. So they need to come up with this language to help businesses. So it's both sides, but overall, it's not looked up to, the gut and replace. But again, my understanding is that the tool is still there, but I don't know how much they're going to actually use it this session.
Great, thank you. All right, and so Miles, you want to take the next question?
Yep, sure. This is from Dennis Boyd of Hawaii SBDC to Sherry. Can you talk a little bit about the biannual schedule for bills at the legislature?
So the biannual, so this is the first of 2 years because there was an election this past year. So you have new legislators. So we're starting a new, I guess, 2 years and new budget. So they will have to consider a biannual budget. Again, as I mentioned, from a timetable standpoint, session is only until end of April. And then next year, bills that did not make it out of session, but was deferred. I think you remember I said bills can be deferred indefinitely. So essentially they could bring those deferred bills back to next legislative session and start where it ended. So if it made it to conference and the bill got deferred, technically they could, the following session, start from conference and pass out the bill that much faster. Generally, that's not done. They start fresh, but it is a tool to have existing bills that did not pass out in the first year to continue the path the following year. Just specifically going to the budget. So one of the things that the legislature is considering, going back to the UI issue, the state did borrow $1.something billion to help fund the UI fund. And the state is required to pay back the loan by, which is right now at $700 million, by next year, November 2022. If they don't, then the federal tax credit, the FUTA tax, will increase. So that will be a huge impact on businesses. So that's a big looming question. One, who's going to pay back the loan? Because technically, the state can impose it on employers and assess employers to pay back this loan, which obviously we wouldn't want. Two, lobby Congress, which we are doing right now, to help fix that, because Hawaii is not the only state that's facing a huge UI problem. So we are lobbying on the federal level to see what they can do to help states that are in this predicament and provide either forgiveness of loan or replenish the UI fund, waive interest fees, etc. Or third, put it in the general fund. And right now, the latest that we heard is that the legislature is considering putting that $700 million loan into the general fund so that the employers are not stuck with this loan. That only takes care of this year. The way the timing works, and if the schedule is lowered, we're going to have to borrow for the next several years. And so we're going to go through this vicious cycle of borrowing monies. And so there needs to be some mechanism or some systematic change to this, to the system to ensure that businesses are not always faced with this big question mark. Are we going to have to pay this loan in the second year, third year, fourth year? Or is the legislature going to continue to put it into the general fund every year? So that's, these are some tough questions that need to be discussed. And we need to find solutions to ensure that the businesses are not stuck with this loan every single year for the next several years.
Excellent. That's good to know. Big things, a lot of big things to think about. Yeah. All right. Do we have any more questions? Do you see any more questions, Miles? Any more chat?
Oh, let's see. I don't see anything coming up.
So I also wanted to circle back about the action alerts.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that both the Hawaii Island Chamber and Kona-Kohala did send out action alerts, and I just wanted to make sure that the members knew that. So we really do lean on our state chamber for a lot of things when it comes to advocacy. So when you guys get those emails from us, that's your opportunity. And then it goes into an even larger database. It's a statewide database, and it's a much larger voice. So we send out a lot of surveys, questionnaires. We definitely are a conduit to Sherry and her team in the state chamber. So those kinds of things are coming your way. And if you see them, definitely participate. So. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, because we hear from legislators, we need to hear more business voices, and the more emails that they get, they can show, hey, look, my constituent said, no, I cannot support this bill. But that was one of the issues, is that they said we need to get the business voice out there. And previous session is challenging, and sometimes we don't want to put our name out there because sometimes it can be on record, and some say it's for fear of retribution, but collectively, if we can all do this together, I think we can move the needle and start turning the narrative and the conversation to what can we do to help businesses, and more importantly, what can we do to get our economy back on track that will in turn create more jobs, as well as the livelihood of our communities. So if we can tell the story in a unified fashion, I think we can truly make a difference.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. I think that's really true. I know our members rely on us to provide testimony on behalf of the organization, and which we do a lot. All of our chambers are involved in that, but oftentimes it's just one letter. Although for Hawaii Island Chamber, we may represent 700 member representatives, is just a single letter. So it's really important that our legislators hear from not only our chambers, but our members individually. Sherry mentioned earlier that, with some legislators, numbers count. And, if you have a stack of letters like that, going for one direction on legislation, it counts versus having a small stack of letters from organizations. So really, member involvement is really important to make things happen. So that's where we need you guys, Kokua.
Also, just one other question, comment, but the state chamber also wanted to get some more specific stories, right, Sherry, about
Yes.
minimum wage? Was that it? So maybe you could just explain what that looks like and why, and then because then we can help to gather that for you.
Yeah, I think there's some legislators, in fact, when we reviewed the bills on the House side, the first several were already bills mandating this, increasing taxes, increasing the minimum wage. And it's like Miles and Wendy referenced earlier, yes, the organizations, and I think most legislators will know our position already. But what hits home for a legislator is when you say, okay, one, if you increase this minimum wage now during a time where I'm trying to keep my doors open, this is what will happen. Whether it's the number of jobs that you have to cut, whether it's reduced hours, whether it's reduced benefits, and also tell them what you are providing, whether it's flexible leave or other types of benefits. Because a lot of them, not a lot, I should say, a vocal minority still think that regardless of the situation, businesses need to pay an increase because of the living wage. And we totally understand that. But many of them have not signed to pay a check. And so they don't understand what it takes. But they also think it's incumbent on the businesses, regardless of the economic situation, to be responsible for paying that wage. But it's the story and what that increase will translate to. If you're a business, so for example, we work with a small business here, a local chip company, and he pays more than minimum wage. But if we increase it to 17, that will force other of their salaries to move up. Because you can't keep it up, move it to 17, and then the employee that was being paid 17 stay at 17. It was wage compression, right? Keeps moving up. But he was able to tell a story. Okay, this is how much it cost for me to get my sweet potatoes. This is how many employees help me peel and cook and prepare sweet potatoes, etc. And I get to sell this to stores, and the stores, restaurants or stores sell it. Anyway, just he was able to communicate it in a way that if this increase happens, this is the number of positions I will have to cut or reduce. And each business has their own story. And you may not be impacted by the minimum wage, but that's only one issue of many issues where there's a narrative being told out there, not by the majority, but vocal minority, that businesses are bad. All they care about is profit. They're Wall Street crooks. And we hear it all the time, that it's all about the money. And we know here in Hawaii, money gets reinvested. They support their employees. They're flexible. At least that's what we're told by our members, that we're here to take care. And again, every business is different. Every business has a way of how they manage their employees. But that's the common narrative that we hear, and increasingly so every session that continues to grow and gain momentum. So by you telling your local story to your senator or representative, that is much more compelling than Chamber of Commerce Hawaii or other organizations going out there and we support or we oppose this bill, because it will impact jobs. That's a boiler template language. It will impact jobs. Our economy will go down. Those are standard, and they know that. But the stories are what they remember. So.
Yep. Everybody loves a good story, that's for sure. That was a great explanation. All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time, and maybe just do a nice closing and thank you, Sherry. But Miles, do you want to go ahead and close us out?
Yeah, sure. It's Friday. Well, no, we really want to thank Sherry for making time for us. It's not often that we get Sherry in front of us as a chamber, considering your busy schedule, and we really appreciate this. And on behalf of our Chamber Hui members, thank you all for joining us today. Have a safe weekend and enjoy the sun. But thanks. We'll see you at the ledge.
Yes.
All right. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks so much, Sherry. That was excellent. I'll go ahead and end the meeting. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.